uh, as people come in, they can kind of capture the rest of the conversation, or this is recorded. So Hector,
Mhm.
thanks a bunch for joining. As I was telling you, so a little bit of inspiration on why I thought this would be a good topic to talk about, and just kind of a good conversation to have. And I think a lot of people can find it useful and sort of refer to this and learn from it. But you and I were chatting a couple weeks ago now, right? Like 2 or 3 weeks ago, in your office there in New York, and we were talking about, just your journey building Dega, to where you are now. And one of the things that really struck me was you talking about being able to leverage, offshore, onshore, near shore, all these different terms, which I'm sure you'll tell us more about resources at your business, and you've been able to do it very successful. And what really struck me was, I hear a lot of MSPs trying to use offshore resources on, nearshore resources, but mostly focused on the technical side, help desk, support, engineers. You hear about people who are using agencies out in the Philippines, out in Asia, nearby. But what really piqued my interest in our conversation was when you were talking about using nearshore, so specifically Colombia, Mexico, nearby resources to do sales, which, I think there's a lot of hesitation, probably, is for lack of a better word, from MSP owners, and I'm sure from yourself, but as you kind of went through that journey on, using offshore resources, language barriers, etc., cultural differences, etc. So wanted to bring you on here and kind of share your journey. So why don't we start? Maybe just give us a little bit about your background, how you started Dega Systems. Maybe talk a little bit about where you guys are now, from like number of employees, where you're located, all that good stuff. So everyone that's joining us now or on the recording will get a better sense of what Degas Systems is.
Sure, no, thank you. Thanks, Victor. We started Dega back in really like late September 2001. I was lived in Queens at the time, and it was a little right after September 11th, unfortunately. And we were
Yeah.
actually, our first client was a client just down the block from the towers, and they needed internet. So we were
Wow.
able to go down there, and we were able to help them out and kind of point them to the AT&T tower. We got them live on the internet. AT&T gave us like a Wi-Fi public, external IP. We got their
Hmm.
email working, and to this day, they're a client. They're one of our largest clients. They're a legal services firm right by yeah, right on Broadway.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the beginning, and who knew that in 2001 that would be a business. So now we are at
Yeah. Yeah.
about 40 clients. I think we've
Yeah.
onboarded like 6 clients in the last 4 months. So it's been a little busy on the
Wow.
sales side. A
Yeah.
lot of it
Yeah.
ISR based.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we're yeah, 23 employees, I think. I always lose
Yeah.
after it was 10 employees, I started losing count. I don't know how
Yeah.
many we have, but I think we're about 22, 23.
Yeah. So about 22 employees, 60-ish clients, growing pretty rapidly. And how long? So 2001 is really when you think that it all
Yeah.
started? Yeah.
2001 when we incorporated, I think it was October of '01 when we actually formed the LLC. And at
Yeah.
the time it was three partners. I was actually the IT person. We had
Yeah.
someone doing web design and someone doing phones. And as you can tell, IT pretty much takes over everything. So before
Yeah.
you know it,
Yeah.
I was able to kind of become the sole owner of Dega Systems. It was about three
Yeah.
years ago. And so then I had to switch from being an ops guy to a sales guy.
Yeah.
And that was tough for me. I've
Right.
never really thought I was a salesperson. I always kind of struggled with that,
Yeah.
but we just, being in tech people, we always want to help.
Yeah.
Right. And luckily I was able to use that skill into sales, and I was able to be analytical, right? I looked at the sales thing. I'm like, man, how does this work? Right. So we're part of
Right.
True Methods, so
Yeah. Okay.
we learned a lot about the inside sales approach. And I realized,
Hmm.
wow, this an inside salesperson, I don't have to hire someone in the US.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So as it turns out, we had someone and they were okay.
Yeah.
But they were just calling and they weren't really being managed correctly. This was someone in the US.
Hmm.
So we ended up, luckily, we actually ended up hiring someone that was I believe it was San Francisco, San Diego, but he
Yeah.
ended up moving to Mexico like a little
Wow.
after that. And we kept him,
Okay.
we kept the salary the same, and he's
Yeah.
still with us. He's a rock
Yeah.
star. And then we started learning the ways of offshore talent. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's been so now we have one person, and we actually about to hire a third ISR. and we
Okay.
have a database person as well. So we could talk about that later. But yeah,
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
about four people in
So,
sales now.
yeah, before we kind of jump ahead, so ISR, just you use the term a couple times. So, like for everyone that's not familiar with the term, like what does ISR stand for? What is that?
Sure. So as part of the True Methods methodology, it's the inside sales representative.
Yeah.
So there's an inside salesperson who's the one that sets the meetings for the OSR, which is the outside salesperson.
Okay.
And that's the person that actually goes out and makes meetings. So the
Yeah.
ISR, just like a technician, they have metrics to hit, right? So about 80 to 100 dials a day, right? We're trying to get about 10 conversations a
Yeah.
day as well. And then from there, ideally one or two meetings that happen after that, sales
Okay.
meetings. So
So
those are the metrics.
maybe using more generic terms. So like ISR is like equivalent of like a BDR or
Mhm.
SDR. And then OSR is more of like an eight. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about like so the business is doing well. Obviously, started around 2001. You obviously most of the team is probably located in New York or surrounding area.
Mhm.
Most of your clients, I would say, in that region or cross region. Where would you say most of your clients are?
In the beginning, it was basically a train right away, right? So we're in the Penn Station area, which is right where
Yeah.
the Madison Square Garden. So we can
Hmm.
get to anywhere in the city in less than 40 minutes.
Yeah.
But recently, and during the pandemic, we started getting clients that didn't even have an office. And
Yeah.
this is an interesting turn of events. All right. So
Yeah.
they're all remote, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, so we have a few of them. We started landing a couple clients. We have a client in Atlanta now, I believe DC. So we're slowly growing.
Okay. Okay. And so what was like was there a point in time as part of your business growing or as part of the search where you were like, okay, like maybe let me look into offshore options, nearshore options. Was it that one employee you talked about who went from San Francisco to Mexico? That was kind of the catalyst. Can you talk more about that?
Sure, yeah. So even before that, we had a virtual assistant and
Okay.
out of a service called Outsourced Access, and she works out of the Philippines. She's amazing.
Yeah.
She's part of our team culture.
Right.
So we already kind of had that, and
Yeah.
everything I've learned being ops is and with sales, you have to involve them in your culture. So
Hmm.
when my sales rep went to Mexico, he was like, "Hey, Hector, we can get some great talent here and increase our dials." I was like, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting." So again, so we're going about 100 dials a day,
Yeah.
we can start having $400 a day. That's right. So
Yeah.
we depending and then before you that, so then you can't just start dialing though, right? So
Right.
we were able to hire staff, and for a while then we even had an office, and that I
Okay.
think is a game changer, right? You want to be
Yeah.
so luckily we have someone we trust, and then we were able to get an office there, and having them right next to each other. Salespeople have to be around others, right? You're going
Yeah.
to learn techniques, you're going to different ways of getting through a gatekeeper, and
Yeah.
that to us has been a game changer
Yeah.
having an office.
So do you think part of the success in being able to hire offshore, near shore salespeople was just having that first person that you can kind of trust to go there and essentially set up the operation?
I think if it's funny, I've actually helped other MSPs get to that, and that's my
Yeah.
first recommendation, right?
Yeah.
Kind of just sample the waters, try to see if you can get someone, and then if you're able to get someone that you trust that's working out and that's a killer, let's see if you can kind of build around that person, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm in New York. My rent is $9,000 a month. Now, for most people, it's not a lot, but it's only like two
Right. Right.
thousand square feet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This is a
I've
price you
seen it.
pay.
It's a nice space, but
It's
it's
in New York
people
City.
in the Midwest or even the
Yeah,
South like this. That's crazy for them. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
know. I hear you. No, it's funny. I live in Long Island now, so space over there is much bigger, different.
Yeah.
But so just I was saying about the office space. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just getting office space down there is inexpensive, right? I think it was
Right.
like $400 a month for
Hmm.
like. I think the biggest concern was having air conditioning. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, air conditioning. So now
Yeah.
you have a place where you want to build a team. So I would say my biggest advice: try to get someone you can work with, and then try to build a team around them, and ideally in an office
Yeah.
space that they can be right next to each other.
Mhm.
Right now with all the tool with Microsoft and all these HubSpot and Close.com, everything's remote anyway. You can
Yeah.
lock a machine down and just let them have at it $100 a day.
So in terms of your team today, you
Mhm.
mentioned you're above 20, maybe closer to 30 people. How many people are one on your sales team and on as part of this like nearshore team
Mhm.
versus do you even have any domestic people
On
selling
sales.
currently? Yeah.
So I'm the outside sales rep right now,
Right.
and that's a role that I think with that one you still have to be
Yeah.
present. Like there's still
Yeah.
right? So like I'm working to the point that I can remove myself from that role.
Hmm.
But right now, again, we have about four. So it's three inside sales representatives, right? They're all
Okay.
calling. And
Yeah.
the most important piece of the puzzle is having a database scrubber. And
Hmm.
I think so many times people just hire a sales rep and say, hey, here you go, here's a list.
Right.
Sometimes that list isn't qualified, right?
Yeah.
So being a tech, what I realized was like, oh my God, we're wasting calls because we have no idea who to talk to. We
Right.
have no idea if the person left, so
Yeah.
and a part of the puzzle is a scrubber. And yeah, so I think our sales team is five in total with me.
Okay. And so everyone except you obviously is down in that office in
Hmm.
Mexico. Is that right?
Actually, no. So the scrubber's in Colombia.
Oh,
And that was also we were just kind of, when you start looking at talent through LinkedIn, which is another place you
yeah.
can find talent,
Yeah.
we were able to luckily, and it's funny, through that one person, we've
Yeah.
hired two other people,
Okay.
right?
All
We
right.
hired a scrubber for a good buddy of mine, and we
Yeah.
even hired a project coordinator that was friends of the person that for the scrubber, and she's
Yeah.
doing a really great job as well. So,
So let's
and it's
talk.
interesting.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that because I think that's probably an interesting topic for people listening in. So it sounds like you kind of, I mean, don't want to put words in your mouth, but you kind of got lucky with your first one, right? Like, is someone
Oh
that you
yeah,
hired?
yeah,
Yeah, it's
hit a home
was in
run
San
with that one.
Francisco, moved to Mexico. But from then on, like how are you finding new talent? Like not just on the sales side, but like, you're also using, offshore help
Mhm.
for operations, tech, etc. So how are you finding some of this talent? Are you using an agency? Are you doing that mostly through like LinkedIn yourself? Like
Yeah,
what are you doing?
LinkedIn's a ton. There's a
Really?
LinkedIn. There's a couple local markets, especially so we're out of Guadalajara. There's a lot of like kind of local things there for
Hmm.
job searches. We have a recruiter for the technical side of the house,
Okay.
and that's a whole different conversation we could talk about,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, they're all employees, and you have to manage them just like you have to manage your own, your inshore, and
Hmm.
some don't work out, and
Right.
some are home runs, right? And then you
Right.
have to kind of foster them, and then you just have to make them part of the team, which
Hmm.
is a challenge, right?
Right. Right.
Luckily, it's easier for us to go to Central America, and because I was born in Brooklyn, my parents are from Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
so I can speak
Yeah.
the language a little bit,
Right.
but
Right.
even still, they still have to work with our team. Right. So we
Yeah.
try to have weekly meetings where they're a part of it. We ask
Mhm.
questions of the day. You want them a part of the company because they're
Yeah.
selling us.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So you mentioned you have your inside sales reps down in Mexico. Like, I mean, let's get at the elephant in the room, right? So like what about like language barriers or anything like that? Do you find or have you heard any stories of because they're calling into US based businesses, right? Like they're
Mhm.
calling Americans, they're calling people who speak English primarily. Like any like any issues there or anything that's, that going into it, were you hesitant about it? And then something that you learned? Yeah, tell us more about that.
So it's interesting. The first salesperson we brought on, he had a friend that used to work at T-Mobile with him. He's like, you got to interview this guy. They interview this guy. The guy's wearing, I think it was wearing like an Atlanta Braves hat. Like, oh, that's
Uh-huh.
interesting. He was an
Uh-huh.
expat that used to live in the US and now he's
Okay.
living in Mexico with his
Yeah.
family. And
Yeah.
then I'm here. That's a very common thing. So I'm talking to this guy. This guy understands our culture,
Yeah.
right? So it wasn't, so I mean, he has a little bit of an accent, but we're in Brooklyn. I mean, we're in New York City. So
Yeah.
a lot of people have
Right.
accents. Now, again,
Yeah.
can I have him calling into Mississippi?
Right.
Maybe not, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there are, you just have to be very particular about a little bit about the accents, and you just have to
Yeah.
listen for that.
Yeah.
But again, there was again a ton of people that used to live here in the States,
Right.
and now
So
they're
that's
there.
interesting. I mean, regional differences too, right? Like so like if you're listening in and you're based in an area where maybe there's not a ton of regional differences, that might be a contributing factor. So but it's interesting. I've heard that before and I think you and I talked about this. You have people who either have grown up in the States, have family ties to the States and essentially speak like perfect English and are
Yeah.
now for whatever reason, living in a place like Mexico. And so like that's obviously a big benefit in terms of like the language barriers, cultural barriers, being able to have some success. So obviously there's a ton of benefits, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
sure everyone is aware of the benefits. Maybe we probably don't need to talk too much about the benefits. I mean, I'm sure cost is
Yep.
great, right? Like there's a lot of benefits in that, but let's talk about the downsides, right? Let's talk about some of the downsides that you've And you kind of mentioned some of them, right? Just in terms of managing the team. But let's talk a little bit about the downsides. Like if you were to, if someone's watching this or watches the recording later and is like, I've been thinking about bringing on, near shore, found the perfect person. Like what would you say if you're starting over? Like what would be some of the things to watch out for and sort of keep an eye on as you kind of progress there?
It's very easy to just abdicate a role.
Mhm.
Most tech people, we don't naturally tend to being salespeople, right? We're educators, we're helpers. And what I see so much is, hey, we hired a sales guy and we kind of leave them alone. Or we'll put them in
Mhm.
a program. We'll put them in like a sales program and then we hope for the best. And I think what I've, talking to a lot of different sales managers, I always heard the statement, you have to stir the pot. You
Yeah.
constantly have to be there, listening
Yeah.
to them, right?
Mhm.
Talking to them, educating them, mentoring them, listening to the fall. You also have to be able to bring them into the culture. So when there's a win on the sales side, the team should know about it, right? Hey,
Yeah.
this is these salespeople have a lot of the hopes and dreams of everyone in the company, right? We
Right.
all want to make more money. We all want to have
Yeah.
different job opportunities, right? A lot of it comes through the sales side. So,
Right.
one of the things I've learned is kind of we celebrate that. But again, you don't want to abdicate the role.
Right.
And I see that so often. It's easy to
Yeah.
abdicate a technical role a little bit, right? There's
Yeah.
all these different solutions, but a sales role, I
Sure.
mean, you have to have someone on it, talking to them daily. Like it's funny, at the end of the day, I try to call my main guy, just have a check in with him. And if I have a sales meeting, I'll try to call him right away.
Mhm.
Hey, this is how the meeting went, right? There
Sure.
should be a dialogue
Yeah.
and just bringing them into culture.
Yeah.
And that's important. Just don't abdicate.
Right.
And I say pick the best payment solution. Paying people in different
Yeah.
countries is very tricky.
Yeah.
So we have a great one called Deal that might work really amazing in
Deal. Yeah.
Mexico
I've heard deal. Yeah.
but like and Colombia, but it doesn't work well in Belize. And now
Right.
you have someone who's depending on the money, they got to wait like another 4 or 5 days for them to get their cash.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a little tough. And that's the one thing like I'm still struggling with trying to find that one payment solution that works for the entire team. So right now we
Right.
think we have three.
Yeah.
And it stinks, right?
Wow.
We're getting by, but we're slowly going
Yeah.
to figure that one out.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about that, the logistics and sort of like the other side of it, right? Like the back office side of employing offshore. Like so you talk about payroll, right? Being able to pay people in different countries. Obviously that's a challenge, different currencies.
Mhm.
But what about other things? Like I mean things that come to mind are like taxes or like benefits and stuff
Mhm.
like that. Are you doing that through like a third party service or what's your setup for all that?
So a lot of the third party solutions have that as an option, and you can ask
Okay.
for that, right? So right now we employ as contractors, right?
Okay.
And there's a little bit of risk that we're taking on.
Hmm.
If we want to actually have provide health insurance, then we can actually use their services. So again, it's not that expensive either. It's not like health insurance in the States,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
So that's something we're graduating to, right? I still feel
Yeah,
like we're still in beta phase in this.
yeah,
So in
yeah.
the end, yeah, like for my New York City people, we pay for their health insurance, optical, and dental, right? And
Right.
I think
Yeah,
that's important, and I think
right,
that's where I want to get to for the offshore people as
right.
well.
Yeah, I guess the difference, right, is like most countries have some form of like,
Yeah,
government health insurance, right? So I mean, I'm sure in Mexico, Colombia, some of these other countries, Belize, they probably have some form of health insurance, right? It's just a different system, so it's not the same in the setup as like, here, if you don't have health insurance through your job, then you don't have health insurance.
yeah.
Um, so it sounds like in terms of tools and sort of managing payroll, sort of managing the benefits, HR side of things, you're using sort of a third party tool.
Mhm.
Um, so if you had to think about it, right, like obviously you're gaining a ton of efficiencies. It sounds like it's working, right? You guys close, would you say 6 new customers in the last
Yeah,
three,
we've been
4 months?
pretty been busy onboarding. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, we just
yeah,
landed a whale that came into. It was just, well, not landed. We just had in our sales funnel, and we're trying to
yeah,
work that one through, and it's a pretty significant one, right? So
yeah.
and it only came in through the ISRs, through
So
the
this
sales
is
reps.
all coming in through the team offshore, just kind of calling,
Mhm.
talking to people that are in your core ICP for potential clients. That's awesome. That's awesome. So it sounds, I mean, it sounds great, right? It sounds great. It sounds like it's you got some additional HR things, maybe some payment stuff when it comes to
Yeah.
payroll. That sounds a little bit difficult, but it sounds like the results are there. In terms of, and you don't have to give real like actual numbers, but just like in terms of helping us quantify, like cost savings, like benefits here. Like if you were to build the same type of team, like in New York, for example,
Hmm.
you know, 3 or 4 sales reps,
Ooh,
inside sales reps. Like, what do you think, like the difference between just percentage, right? Like not actual numbers, but just like from a percentage basis, like what do you think that would look like? Obviously, New York is high cost of living,
it's uh,
but
it's it's
everyone that's listening, obviously discount, 10, 20% wherever you are, but
yeah. I
there's
could say the cost of my entire team would probably pay for one really good salesperson in New York City.
wow, wow.
And that's, but again, now again, does that mean that I'll never hire? No, we'll definitely want to hire, right?
Sure,
And I think
sure.
there are some places where you have to have a person in the city. So we've thought about, do we want to have one in DC, one in New York? And that's kind of where we're graduating to.
Hmm.
It was weird. Like, we purposely decided not to do any marketing,
Hmm.
because I couldn't understand marketing, right? I could not understand metrics. I could
Yeah,
understand, what does that really mean? Like, I'm spending this for Google. What is the end result was? But I
right.
could understand phone calls to conversations,
Yeah,
right? And I
yeah.
think that was a metric that I could understand, and I could understand the math of bringing in someone, right? Someone, it could cost you anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 US, depending on what country they're in,
Hmm.
right? So for a sales rep, but now I'm talking about 100 calls a day,
Yeah,
right? And then
yeah.
what, 20 work days, right? 2,000, right? 20,000 calls, well, whatever, 100 times 20, right? That's how many calls you're going to have on a monthly basis. Now, times it by how many sales rep you have, and
Yeah.
the numbers start making sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's yeah, I mean, we do the same thing on our end, right? It's like it's all kind of equated to like how much does a person cost you and how much business can they bring you? And then the math sort of works out there. In the last few minutes, I do want to leave some time for some of the questions. We got some questions ahead from
Mhm.
people for email and then, obviously people that are attending the live recording. But before we get into that, so again, just this sounds great. I mean, if I were an MSP, right, and I were looking to kind of grow the business and see areas where I can get efficiency, but also grow, sounds like something, I would be very interested in sort of look into. So, but at the same time, it just seems like such a challenge, right? Like I don't know, from my perspective, it just seems like, well, you have people in foreign countries. Now you have to worry about like what they're doing, out of sight. But like maybe talk a little bit,
It's
and
the
you and
same
I were
thing, though. The same thing for
yeah, so
sales
you
rep.
and I
Like,
were talking
it's
about this. It's like, yeah, now with like people working remote, like maybe talk a little bit about like, I mean, it sounds like you think it's the exact same thing, but just like I feel like now with people working remotely, right? It's like less of a change than when everyone was just like
yeah.
in the same office. Yeah.
No, it's so fun. So I was an ops guy for, until I bought out the company. And I
Yeah.
would always listen to people complaining about their salespeople. And it was always the same exact thing. I don't know what they're doing. They could be working on a job and all this. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the same exact thing over there.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think the interesting thing is, I think if you were compare it, other than the pain part, the accent, you just have to work through a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
But like, I don't see a difference between the two.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I feel like I feel like you're making it seem super easy, but yeah, I'm sure there's
No,
it's not. And you said this earlier, right? That there's no silver bullet, so it kind of depends on uh
right person.
the right people, your clients, right? Like the type of clients you probably serve or the type of clients you try and serve might depend on the region you're in. So it's just kind of there's no one size fits all, it seems like from your perspective.
But regardless of where you hire a salesperson, the thing that I'm seeing the most is abdicating of roles, and the database is in bad shape.
Hmm.
For us, when we have our scrubber, she's finding we're using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, right? So pretty up to date. People are always updating when they're working. Every company has 3 people,
Hmm.
right? So if we don't hit one person, we're hitting the next person. We're emailing,
Right.
but we're
Yeah.
hitting actual, current people. And I see
Right.
so many people, they're not spending time on their database. And then what
Hmm.
happens is they're calling to someone who left, leaving voicemails, and who knows, they're never going to get back. So that's a wasted call. And
Yeah.
if the worst part is, in another month, there'll be another wasted call because they're calling them again. So I think the
Yeah.
database is the most important thing. And then where
Yeah.
you hire the salesperson doesn't really matter, but that
Yeah.
database has to be gold.
As long as they're working off good data, sounds like that's the key.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm just in the last few minutes, I'm gonna see if anyone who's attending live has any questions. While we wait with that, I do have three questions that people sent over in advance. So let me kind of read through some of these. So one question we got, which I think is kind of interesting, a little, more generic, but you mentioned uh, your your inside sales reps are doing 100 calls. So this question specifically around KPIs, like what are the KPIs of those salespeople? And if there's any KPIs, if the KPIs are different from US based salespeople, they sent the question in advance. So obviously,
Sure, sure, sure.
other than yourself, you don't have US based salespeople. So maybe let's talk about what are the KPIs for that sales team? And would it be different if you had a US based sales team?
They'd be the same. It's because I'm part of a peer group. We talk about all of our numbers,
Hmm.
right? So again, the that sales rep is in their home making phone calls.
Yeah.
They're not visiting anywhere. They're just making phone calls. So again, it's $100 a day, and then from there we want about a tenth of that to be actual conversations with decision makers, not a
Yeah.
conversation with a gatekeeper, someone who like, pick up like someone who can
Hmm.
actually make a decision. And then
Hmm.
from there, ideally, we want to have one or two meetings that show up after that, right? And then
Okay.
from there, we're talking about ideally 13, anywhere from like 10 to 13 meetings a month would be perfect. We've seen the numbers dip a little bit, right? So we're seeing about
Hmm.
eight, anywhere from eight, even with my roster, I'm seeing about eight meetings a month, and
Yeah.
people aren't answering the phone, but they're
Hmm.
checking email. So
Okay.
I would say
Yeah.
the metrics for us is the same as anyone in the US.
Okay. And then the another question, a topic that we actually didn't touch on is compensation. How is compensation split between a salary and variable compensation?
So we decided to pay pretty much the same thing we pay our US when we had a US person, right? So we have a spiff, or like a commission for every FTA that's actually held. So we pay $25. Actually, or it could be 50. I forget. I forgot. I just did payroll a little while ago.
Sure.
And then from there, and then we have a portion of the actual month we'll give as a commission if we land the deal. So we were pretty aggressive with that, right? Because we're like, for me, I was like, I'll give away a month if I can keep the other 11 for the year, right?
Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
again, so and I would say this is a great opportunity, especially if you're working with someone who's the next Pat. And this is a great way you can change their lives, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm seeing that they're just as loyal as their inshore people. So.
Yeah, yeah. And so in terms of like what typical comp looks like, so they have the base salary and
Mhm.
then it sounds like they have a variable based on, are you basing that on like activity levels, number of dials, or are you basing that based on like the number of appointments that they set?
I've seen some people do it on activity level. I don't
Yeah.
base it on that. I actually want
Right.
a meeting. Give me a
Yeah.
meeting that could talk to someone who can give us money,
Yeah.
and then I'm
No,
going to comp
makes
you on that.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And then maybe one last question here. I have um okay, so how do you deal with time zones? So it sounds like get me don't get I'm forgetting here, but it sounds I think you did have some team in
Mhm.
like different time zones, right?
Yep.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
outside. So how do you deal with time zones?
It's interesting. I being in New York, we seem to think New Yorkers are the center of the world.
Right.
So for
Eastern
us,
time
Eastern
everywhere.
time zone. Yeah, Eastern
Yeah.
time zone, that's the work. We are growing a little bit, right? So I can see ourselves we have some people in Belize, and I think they're 2 hours
Hmm.
at
Ahead. Yeah.
ahead of, right? So for them, or behind, they're 2 hours behind, right? So for them,
Okay.
if I started calling into California, all right, it might make sense to have someone over there.
Yeah.
But we're definitely not hitting the West Coast right now. We have more than enough business in New York City.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like everyone's either working New York hours or calling people that are not
Yeah.
awake during New York hours. So awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Hector, this is awesome. Thanks for joining us. I think this was super interesting. I hope a lot of people will find this helpful. If anyone wants to kind of reach out to you, maybe talk a little bit more about, strategic side of how to set this up, where can they reach you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, so just Hector Ortiz,
LinkedIn.
Dega Systems. Yeah. And
Awesome.
again, we've helped other people out hiring people. I've done it for my buddies, but like again, it's not that hard, right? You
Yeah.
can just a LinkedIn post, and you get one or two great people, and before you know it, you have a sales team in Guadalajara.
You're gonna see a lot of people who watch this and watch the recording who are gonna come to you and said, Hector, you said it wasn't hard. How can we do it?
All good. Well, how about?
Anyway, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Hector. And yeah, keep on crushing it. It sounds like you got a nice model going on there. And so, yeah, if anyone else wants to reach out to Hector on LinkedIn, obviously. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Catch you on the
Awesome.
next one. All
Thanks,
right,
Victor.
thanks.
All right. Bye.